Welcome to Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield. This episode is sponsored by Springs Mental Health Summit, a summit for parents, teachers, neighbors, and friends to talk about mental health in our community. For more information, go to springsummit.org. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Welcome to this episode of Candid Conversations, and I am not Trever. This is Dr. Mayfield. I'm taking the role of host today because Trever and our guest Peter are going to be talking about their new podcast that they're doing, but also talking about this idea of nerd culture. And I want to come from it today a little bit from this imagination piece that I think our society has lost. And so your new podcast and kind of movement, if I can say that, is this idea of Praying for Superpowers. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's a podcast that Peter Jordahl and I do talking about nerd culture, the deeper meanings, messages, and intricacies, and as well as just being able to have fun being nerdy.
Yeah. So I'm a nerd, and I'm very much proud of that. But there's like so many different subsets of that, and what you guys are talking about is this idea of comics and fantasy books and role-playing games and those kinds of things, right? Or are you kind of reaching the spectrum?
We've really been wanting to hit it all.
Okay.
Is something that we've wanted to make sure we include is just about everything because the nerd culture is so broad now. From things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where, I have 80-year-old patients debate MCU movies with me,
Sure.
Which is awesome,
right.
All the way to, things like Dungeons and Dragons and Lord of the Rings board games.
And books that we grew up reading as a kid. Peter and I have both talked at length about the Ender's Game and our agreements and disagreements. And that's another distinction that we really love about this culture is it's kind of like sports. You can have your team, your thing you want to root for, and be viciously against the other content, like the DC versus Marvel conflict. It's fun to be able to say, no, and I'm not going to get into it right now because I'm definitely going to hit some nerves. But there's a beauty in that conversation that happens, which you and I, Dr. Mayfield, have talked about a lot of. Sometimes it's just important to have a conversation.
Right. And this is why we're having this conversation. And it's hilarious to me because back in the 1993, 94, 95, 96, when I was at the apex of my nerdiness.
And we were just getting born.
And you weren't even born yet, I don't think, which makes me feel really old. I would have loved to have this type of we're calling it nerd culture. Like, no, I was just a nerd and I got beat up, made fun of, stuffed in lockers, swirlies, that kind of stuff. But if I had this culture, my crew with me that I could, utilize, I think it's fabulous because it gives a name to it. It gives credibility and credence to the things that we all enjoyed. I mean, I was huge into, back then it was, Tolkien and Lewis, and that's what I geeked out on. And I love Marvel stuff, but, I'm going to step on some toes here. I could really care less about Marvel or DC. And I know that that's blasphemy right now. But then when I've hung out with you guys and I've played, some role-playing games and that kind of stuff, it's like, I enjoy this, but it's not something that's going to consume my life. And I'm not saying it's consuming your guys' lives, but I know it does some people's lives where this is all they do and they don't have a full-time job. But for me, I want to touch on what I really enjoy about it is the imaginative part.
Totally.
And I think, you look at our culture and we have, maybe not so much anymore. We do this with our girls, go downstairs and play. Get your Legos out. Go play with your dolls. Go in the backyard and play. Well, what? I'm going to be bored. I'm like, good, figure it out. And that's where the imagination really sparks. But with our video games and with our screen times and, I think around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old now, we lose that imaginative piece. And I think we should hold on to that as an adult, right? I mean, so talk about the imaginative part of this culture.
So Peter and I love video games. However, video games and TV are some of the things that we find we don't always have the time for and aren't the best for us. So we would prefer to play a board game.
Yeah. I think it's I don't know. I think I became like disinterested with video games in college. I played so many. I failed class, and I've had friends who've said like, oh yeah, that's why I failed that semester. It's because that video game came out, and that's all I did. And it's like, I enjoy it. Like it's fun to play a video game, but there is no imagination. It's focus. It's not freedom.
Where D&D games that I play with you guys has been that creation and that imagination, and that it's not, well, it's focused too, but it's not like a video game.
Right. I think it's almost this distinction of when you're playing D&D or any board game, the conversation that can happen around it or inside of it builds community. And that growth in community through imagining is what I love about it.
Yeah. And I love just the fact that in D&D, we talk in our first episode on the show that it's no longer seen as we're going to cut our arms open and make sacrifices to the devil. It's a community storytelling game.
Which is why I couldn't play it when I was in the
Right. I wasn't allowed to play it when I was in middle school.
I wasn't able.
Because it was that perception.
And I think that's most of us. We grew up either not being allowed or being told not to.
I wasn't even allowed to read Harry Potter when it came out.
Fair enough.
Okay. That was 14, 15 years ago, right?
But I love it because as a DM, somebody who's a dungeon master who leads the story, kind of the narrator, if you want to think about it that way, I get the opportunity to come up with a skeleton of a plot line, and then my friends around the table are the ones that are building it with characters and worlds and adventures, and always taking the plot, where I thought it was going to go to A, they go all the way to like X.
Yeah, you think it's going to be like the Lord of the Rings, this intense, awesome quest, and it's really the Simpsons in Middle Earth. Like it's just this weird joke show, basically. Is how it turns out sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
It is. It's a blast. It's community.
But that's why I like what you said. It's community. It's relationship. It's conversation. And I think the outside world perception is, like you're just wasting your time on this kind of stuff.
Right.
But we know as therapists that one of the major ways that we grow, we thrive, and we survive in this world is through conversation, relationships, trust, and meaningful stuff. And this is a platform or a conduit for those things.
The other day in a class that you were being a guest speaker for my class that I teach, a girl asked you about reading and whether reading at night had to be, or reading at any point had to be academic, or if it could be fun. And you mentioned something really interesting about two different realms of intelligence or interaction.
Well, we look at we've talked about this, I think, in season 1, is that there are 5 different intelligences. There's the imaginal, psychomotor, physical, sensual, and emotional. And, all of us are on that scale, and one of them is, or 2 of them are going to be higher for us. But one of the ones I find that gets lost a lot of times is the imaginal. And I've got one of the coolest nephews in the whole world. I got 3 really great nephews. But my oldest nephew on my wife's side of the family has the most vibrant imagination that I've ever seen in my life. And he gets lost in his imagination when he's 9 years old, or 8 years old, go for it. And people have looked at him kind of differently, and it's like, no, this kid is like brilliant, but he's showing his brilliance through his imagination. And, when I'm out there, we're playing with each other, it's like, I'm going to join him on his imaginative journey. And I think as a society, we go, well, he's being detached from reality. I'm like, no, he's probably more in tune to reality than the most of us are, because he's actively engaging that. And so what I told this girl is, I think in some ways it's even more important to read a fantasy novel or a book, because not only are we engaging kind of our intellect through reading, but we're engaging the imagination. I mean, I was really happy with the first Lord of the Rings, because that's how I imagined it as a kid.
Like Peter Jackson's first trilogy.
First trilogy.
Okay.
Hobbit, don't get me started. But the Lord of the Rings, right? The first of the. It was everything that I had imagined in the books as I was read them as a kid. I'm bummed, with the Narnia movies. The Narnia.
Oh my gosh.
The new Narnia movies were close to how I imagined them, but the acting was bad and the cinematography was not very good. And I'm like, I would love it if somebody would take the Narnia movies, or the Narnia series, and create something as beautiful as what Peter Jackson did in the trilogy. Right? But that's how I engage my imagination. And I've, after the class last week and then preparing for this conversation today, I'm like, I need to just pick up a novel. Sanderson's book Legion 3 is coming out, and I'm looking forward to getting that, right? And just getting lost in a different world, a different place, I think is something that we as a society suck at. And that's why I love this conversation with you guys, because you're engaging that. But let me ask you this question. I'm going to maybe step on a couple toes, but I know our listeners are probably going, okay, there comes a point when this is too much. Or there comes a point when this is good. Like every good thing, there's too much of it, right? Ice cream's fabulous, but if that's all you eat, right?
Right. Aristotle.
Right.
All things in
so, have you guys found in your life where you go, okay, this is good, and I need this in my life, but now it's becoming unhealthy?
I think for me, if it's interrupting another part of my life significantly, and college, seeing that video games did that to my grades, that was definitely okay. This is too much. And even now, I was addicted. I don't know if that's a clinical addiction.
It is.
It
is.
Nowadays,
and the new
yeah.
ICD-10, which is an international diagnostic manual, video gaming is a diagnosable addiction.
Just came out.
So I'm sure that I would have been diagnosed with that had I been tested when I was in college. And I was doing that, I think, in many ways to escape from my reality.
Sure.
And I think that's kind of the line. If you're using it as an escape, or it is becoming a detriment to another part of your life, that's where you're hitting those issues.
So if you're married, if it's taking away from your marriage, probably not a good thing.
Right.
If you have a father and kids, and
if you're like, no, I can't come down to family dinner. I'm in the middle of a D&D campaign, and that's a problem.
Chances are you might have a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally. Well, and I remember even just my thinking. I was so caught up in thinking about the next character that I wanted to write, or the next video game I wanted to play, or different maps, where it was interfering with anything else I wanted to do with my brain. And fortunately, at the height of this, I think I was working as a janitor or a Walgreens clerk or something. So it was a super mindless job. Sure. But if it hadn't been mindless, I was so distracted with this imaginal world that I was creating and the stories that I was coming up with in my head, that I would have totally lost whatever job I had if I had to think at all.
Sure. Well, I think that's a good distinction. I think that's, with anything that we do, there's this balance, and that's huge. But I think that we lose we're as a society are on the like anorexic end of the imaginal piece, right?
Totally.
I've got a friend in Amarillo, Texas that this was his life growing up, and he decided to turn it into a business and created a comic book store called Unknown Comics, and they ship comics all over the world. And they create their own series and their own line. They have their own artwork. I think I showed you this a couple weeks ago.
They have yet to reach out and say that they will sponsor our show, but we're still reaching out.
Keep on doing it because I know that his wife listens to this podcast. So
there you go.
If you're listening,
we would love for you to be a sponsor.
Call them and get them sponsored. That's the thing. Our friend Shane is into comics as well, and that was part of his escape and his not escape from reality, but just his self-care in some ways.
Yeah, a break from the routine.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's fabulous. So okay, let's say we got a listener right now that's going, okay, I'm going to play two scenarios out here and see what you guys think. But the first scenario is my kid, this is all they do, and I hear what you're saying, and yet they're not doing chores, they're not following through with things, their grades are suffering and that kind of stuff. How would you encourage them to engage that world and then help set boundaries?
Yeah. Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, I think you have to find the world they want. There's so many different parts of imagination. I cannot stand reading a comic book. I get so bored because I have a really vivid imagination. So I don't want to see someone else's drawings.
Sure.
I want to picture it myself. And so I would never get into that. But if that pushes your kid to, pretend to be a superhero at age 9, or what have you, that's awesome.
Yeah. I think there's a way to turn it for the better. And I'd ask the first question of, is the child in community with other people in that world? And is that a good community, healthy one? Because I think that is a really deciding factor on whether it needs to be limited or changed. And then I think being able to enter yourself as a parent into that world and say, hey, I want to watch this movie with you. However, after the movie, we're going to do this. Because you can use it, you can make it a treat and something really enjoyable and a motivator. And if you're engaging with it too, chances are they're really going to enjoy it more, because this whole nerd culture is more fun when we're doing it together. Mm-hmm. And so if you're interjecting saying, hey, I want to do this with you, and then let's get your chores done.
And I think that's a big deal. It's that active parenting piece that we talked about a long time ago in our season 1.
I loved that episode.
Yeah, and it's how do we engage in our kids' worlds, whether we like it or get it or not.
Yeah.
But that was my second question, which you kind of answered already. So if I got a parent listening right now that says, okay, that's my kid, I have no idea where to start. Because it's a vast thing. We talked about, in this last 20 minutes, we've talked about DC, Marvel, we talked about D&D board games, we talked about, C.S. Lewis and we talked about all this kind of stuff. So if a parent wants to start going, okay, this is important to my kid, I've shut it down, for the last couple of years because I just didn't get it and I felt like it was a waste of time, but now you're telling me it's good. How do I get started?
Listen to our show.
Listen to your show. Okay.
You can find us at prayingforsuperpowers.com. We're on iTunes and SoundCloud as well right now. Peter?
I was going to say, I think to see your child and see that as something that you want to be a part of, encouraging that in a way, like we were talking about a bit ago, just of interacting with them, but you can really go a step further, and do it on your own and then bring it to them. So find an author that they like, or a TV show they like, and watch it yourself, or read it yourself, or play that board game yourself, and then talk to them about it. And, depending on your relationship, they could be amazed and excited, or they could be like, oh, well, now I can't like it. My parent likes it.
Right.
So, but I think that would be a solid step to take.
You can also Google things. I remember in high school, all of my friends were talking about superheroes, and I would just Wikipedia certain superheroes, and it would come up with all of the plot history since 1960 and like all the different names, the costumes that were worn, way more information than you ever need to know. But even if you just pull out a sentence or two and be like, hey, did you know that Ant-Man was abusive towards his wife and like they got a divorce back in like this episode? And what do you think about that? Like things that are interesting to real life as well, and you can pull in, you can find that stuff. And chances are, if you're finding something that interests your child, you can just ask a simple question
and then shut up.
And they will talk and talk and talk and talk, and then you can just ask more questions.
Well, we go back to that episode of being the student of your child. I think that's the biggest piece is you have to do what they like. They're their individual, unique person, and so to craft them into little mini yous is not the best way to do it, but to follow along with that. So I love this. I hope that you'll go listen to Pray for Superheroes podcast, and even if it's like, okay, it's going to take some work to sit and listen to this because I don't understand the nerd culture, you're going to like it. You're going to like it. I think it's just it takes some time to understand it and to immerse yourself into that culture a little bit. But I appreciate you guys being here and talking through this. Anything last minute that you would like to share or to talk through that we haven't asked?
Yeah, well, just kind of. This is more of a suggestion, I guess. We really like the authors, Brandon Sanderson and Orson Scott Card, and it's because they're safe and clean.
Mm.
I've picked up a lot of books over the years, and, it's great writing, and then I get 10 chapters in, and it becomes smut,
right?
And so Focus on the Family has a great resource that I now use before purchasing books to find out. I don't remember what it's called, but they review movies and books and TV shows.
Is it plugged in?
Yeah, plugged in. To find out, like, okay, am I okay with my kid reading that? Okay, I am. Should I read that? Oh yeah, I'll read that. That's definitely something I would do.
And something that we've really enjoyed and that has been driving the podcast Praying for Superpowers is there's so much about real life in nerd culture. The stories in comic books and movies and TV shows, it's kind of just exaggerating one part of our humanity. It's really exaggerating one part of our humanity and putting it in a totally different universe where it kind of sits in contrast and comparison. So you have real life situations of how do I care for my friends, but also follow through with my duties throughout all of Star Trek.
Right. Well, I think in essence, it's a realistic melodrama.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right. Which is fantastic because it over accentuates a part to make a point.
Yeah.
But there's so many life lessons too that I think parents forego seeing in comics or these movies or these games or these books that can be great active parenting tools for self-control and kindness and compassion and drive and dreaming and all those kinds of things.
Well, and I'd say that the series of Unfortunate Events, which is on Netflix right now and absolutely amazing.
It's great.
And the books are incredible as well. I would say that's a story about resiliency.
Right.
The Baudelaire children they never give up. They're constantly going through trials and tribulations and adults not listening.
That's what the series is really about. Adults don't listen to kids.
Which they may have a point.
Right.
But those lessons we can learn, and it's such an entertaining way. It's kind of the spoonful of sugar.
Sure.
Or the spoonful of medicine.
No, spoonful of sugar.
Spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go. There you go. There you go.
Sing the song. Come on.
Nerdum is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down, where we can teach these valuable lessons and we can highlight it for our kids if we're engaged as well.
Well, for parents that are still not sure what they think about this, what is your kid reading right now? My daughter reads chapter books, 10 years old, reads chapter books at bedtime, and it's usually Nancy Drew mysteries. It's usually, Adventures in Odyssey type things. Imagination Station. But here's the thing, right? That's no different than what we're talking about right now. It's just a different form. And so I challenge parents to go, this is in moderation and in active parenting style. This is a good thing for your kid and even for you. For those of us that are in our 30s now and don't read as much as we probably should, especially fiction stuff, fantasy stuff. It's a good thing. Well, I appreciate you guys being here. I hope that your podcast does well, and I hope that this is something that takes off because, man, I wish I had it 20 some odd years ago. So thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, go to mayfieldcounseling.com/candid conversations and check out our Facebook page, Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield.